Settle in, traveling night owl, because we're about to ransack the medieval pantry, cog a little at the smell, and still come back for seconds more, out of stubborn curiosity than culinary wisdom. I'll keep the lullaby cadence you like for long videos, but lace it with a streak of mischievous grin. No titles, no bullet points, no clunky chapter signs, just an uninterrupted river of words wide enough to float a 2-hour drift-off voyage and long enough to clear the 15,000-word moat. Yes, I counted. Ready? Good. Tighten your drawstring pants because belts were luxury leather and we can't risk losing you mid-snooze. Imagine a candle guttering on a drafty oak table, the flames doing the medieval cha-cha, and in that flicker you find tonight's feast. One heroic ladle of watery porridge, a slab of bread baked to the density of river rock, and a sliver of meat so tough you suspect it died of natural causes, rose from the grave, and died again just to taunt you. That, dear listener, is dinner for about 95% of Europe in the 1300s. Meanwhile, somewhere across a moat, a duke is loosening his ermine collar and wondering if the third roasted swan tastes too samey. If life were fair, swans would unionize. Why was peasant chow so uninspiring? First, spices cost more than your life insurance premium. Picture a spice merchant on the Silk Road wearing too much eyeliner for someone on camelback. He weaves through bandits, quicksand, sandstorms, and the occasional "Are we there yet?" from apprentice traders, all to deliver 1 pouch of nutmeg. Price tag, 7 fat oxen in 10.99. Side note, oxen apparently had phenomenal self-esteem because they never accepted being valued at 6. By the time cinnamon reached a village inn, the barmaid guarded it like modern gamers guard Wi-Fi passwords. Without spices, flavor relied on garlic, mustard, and vinegar. The holy trinity of this will make the mash taste like something other than sadness. Fresh veggies, seasonal at best. It's hard to plate a rainbow when winter buries your garden under 3 feet of existential dread. The luckiest households coaxed onions, leeks, or cabbage from thin soil, but even that required wrestling geese who treated every sprouting green like personal property. The result? A population surviving mostly on bread and pottage, grain soup so ubiquitous it could qualify for medieval citizenship. Grains-filled bellies, yes, but left vitamins crying in the corner. Malnutrition stunted growth so much that if time travel ever forces you into a medieval crowd, you'll suddenly feel like a towering NBA center. Congratulations, you're Sir Dunk-a-Lot. Meat? Practically fan fiction. Families might raise a pig named Future Christmas or a chicken that doubled as alarm clock, but slaughtering them early was like cracking open your piggy bank to buy candy in February. You could do it, but winter would side-eye you. When a pig finally met destiny, not an ounce went wasted. Nose-to-tail dining wasn't a trendy restaurant gimmick, it was a survival algorithm. Got an organ you can't identify? Season it with bravado and chew. Fish offered coastal folk brief reprieve, though rarely fresh. Most fish deserved a LinkedIn badge in salt preservation. Herring slept all winter in brine barrels so intense they could pickle the memory of your first heartbreak. Cod traveled so far packed in salt that by the time you ate it, you were basically chewing on the concept of the ocean. Eel featured often thrifty, slippery, and definitely plotting revenge. Preservation techniques kept famine at bay but taste buds hostage. Sauerkraut appeared because someone decided cabbage should live forever. Fruits dried into wrinkly caricatures of themselves, lasting through winter but tasting like the ghost of summer whispered on cardboard. Bread, the eternal staple, endured its own personality crisis. Bakers bulk dough with ground acorns, chalk, or sawdust. Imagine biting into a loaf and wondering if you've accidentally started gnawing the barn door. Yet in cities, folks complained less about flavor and more about dental bills. Well, they would have if dentistry existed. Ale, the medieval sports drink, faced sabotage too. Alewives watered it down until it was basically bread-flavored tea. Still, it beat drinking river water infused with yesterday's chamber pot. The brewing process at least murdered most bacteria, though it couldn't kill disappointment. Rumor has it some alewives stretched inventory so far that you could see daylight through your pint. Hygiene? Pass me the plague mask. Livestock bunked beside humans for warmth, leaving droppings that seasoned every surface with eau de nope. City streets hosted a roulette of garbage, sewage, and rats auditioning for Black Death the musical. Markets buzzed with flies, which doubled as organic toothpicks. Nature's cruelty had range. If you survived food poisoning, congratulations. Dysentery, typhoid, or plain scurvy waited backstage. Even kings weren't immune. John of England supposedly downed spoiled peaches and cider, then spent his final hours discovering just how quickly a royal digestive tract can stage a coup. When plague hit, poor diets and filth turned Europe into a flea theme park. The bubonic baddies marched across the continent like a goth parade, singing "Ring Around the Rosie" before you even had time to Google symptoms. Yet monasteries sometimes shone as culinary safe zones. Monks kept herb gardens fresher than influencer skincare routines. Some wrote cookbooks filled with decadent dishes. We'd call them influencer collabs today, but rarely shared beyond monastery walls. Charity did exist. Abbeys offered loaves to peasants, who gratefully accepted, then immediately chipped a tooth on filler-heavy crust. Speaking of wealth, noble feasts were Game of Thrones episodes minus the dragons, plus indigestion. Picture a banquet where roast peacock arrives re-feathered in technicolor glory like it's about to host Eurovision. Tables groaned literally if you listened closely under pies, pasties, sweetmeats, and jellied everything. Spices cascaded like confetti. But even high society risked death by too much of a good thing. Spoiled venison or salmonella swan could torpedo an entire lineage faster than you can say, "Pass the pilfered pepper." Doctors, armed with leeches and optimism, called it a cleansing humoral readjustment. The patient called it ouch. While nobles flaunted gastronomic pageantry, peasants nursed bowls of pottage that had simmered so long legend said it predated the house. They dreamt of tasting saffron once before meeting St. Peter, though St. Peter probably served pottage too, budget being what it was. Let us not forget the church's culinary curveballs. Lent demanded 40 days of meatless menu planning for people who barely saw meat 40 days a year. Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays convicted bacon of sin. Dairy occasionally joined the outlaw list. Peasants' stomachs lodged formal protests, but heaven's HR ignored the memo. Fasting did have a silver lining. Fishmongers hit quarterly targets, and eels rejoiced at newfound celebrity status briefly before becoming stew. Yet monasteries offered hope. Picture a weary mother arriving at abbey gates, 3 hungry kids in tow, and a monk handing her a steaming bowl of vegetable barley soup that tasted like mercy itself. Those moments lit tiny beacons of humanity across a bleak landscape. Now adulteration. We covered bread, but let's revisit with extra shenanigans. Some bakers swapped flour with ground bones. Lend new meaning to rib-sticking meal, doesn't it? Government inspectors tried policing cheats, but bakers paid fines the way modern corporations pay parking tickets, cheaper than following rules. Public shaming helped. Guilty bakers tied loaves around their necks while being paraded through town. Word of advice: if you plan on medieval time travel cosplay, maybe skip that role. Water quality: rivers doubled as trash chutes, laundry tubs, and sometimes graveyards for unfortunate hogs. Wells sat dangerously close to latrines because urban planners apparently played Sim City on hard mode. Thank fermentation for knocking out bacteria, or humanity might have tapped out before inventing Wi-Fi. Let's talk famine. The medieval equivalent of software outages, only with fewer memes. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1322 turned Europe into a dinner-free zone. Crops failed, herds shrank, and people ate tree bark casserole garnished with despair. Some chronicles mention cannibalism, others politely edit that part out like a family photo where Uncle Gerald blinked. After the famine, peasants learned new appreciation for weeds. They weren't just yard decorations, they were Tuesday's salad. Ironically, the Black Death briefly tipped power toward laborers. With half the workforce buried, surviving peasants demanded higher wages and occasional meat. Nobles panicked and passed wage freeze laws, proving that no matter the century, management can't resist turning back the clock. The ensuing peasants' revolt of 1381 featured pitchforks, fiery speeches, and one universal slogan: "You had one job, pay us." Spoiler: the revolt got quashed, but the idea that workers deserved bacon never fully died. Despite everything, medieval cooks innovated. They fermented, pickled, smoked, and dried with virtuoso flair. Sauerkraut became probiotic avant la lettre. Cheese aged into living legends. Parmesan wheels older than some crusades. Gruyere guarded like Fort Knox. Honey acted as sugar, cough syrup, and hair gel. People extracted flavor from boredom itself. Case in point, that onion leek cabbage trio which, after 8 hours in cauldron purgatory, tasted vaguely like belonging. Yet the class divide persisted. One winter night,
A serf traded his last goose-feather quilt for a handful of oats. A mile away, a baron complained the kitchen ran out of marzipan swans. If medieval Twitter existed, it would have been spicy. Unsanitary kitchens birthed folklore too. Cooks blamed mischievous sprites for rancid stew. Some households kept kitchen cats specifically to scare goblins away. Bonus: rodent control. Turns out the only spirit spoiling dinner was under refrigeration, but superstition kept people entertained between plagues. Monastic thinkers like Hildegard of Bingen preached the virtues of spelt centuries before gluten intolerance trended. She penned advice that basically yelled, "Stop eating raw grains, you maniacs," and humanity barely listened. Today spelt's back in health food aisles, wearing a price tag that would shock even those nutmeg-trading oxen. And what of desserts? Sugar arrived late to Europe's party, wearing an exotic cape and charging cover at the door. Early confectioners sculpted sugar castles that doubled as dental apocalypse. Nobles loved them so much they'd keep nibbling long after logic screamed, "Stop." The resulting toothaches could slay a duke quicker than a French archer. Let us drift into a bustling spice bazaar, merchants hawking cinnamon while side-eyeing thieves, camels sneezing pepper into the wind, diamonds in the rough disguised as cloves. A peasant, teleported by fantasy, picks up a pod of cardamom, inhales deeply, and considers selling his entire village to taste it. He sighs, pockets a pebble instead, and tells himself pebbles probably taste similar. That's the kind of compromise medieval hunger taught. But hunger wasn't the only instructor. Community solidarity wrote side lessons. During harvest, neighbors formed threshing crews, trading labor for shared bread and cider. At weddings, even poorest households scraped enough flour to bake celebration loaves the size of toddlers. Joy bubbled up like illicit ale batches, defiant and fragrant. Of course, on the other side of the drawbridge, feasts escalated to theatrical levels. One cook once hollowed a pie, stuffed live birds inside, and served it so the crust sang when cut open. Diners cheered. The birds probably filled out trauma surveys later. Table etiquette demanded tossing bones onto the floor, where dogs fought for scraps, which in turn provided dinner theater for guests bored of lute solos. Another night, a king challenged his chefs to craft an entire edible menagerie. Sugar elephants trumpeted molten caramel, marzipan hedgehogs bristled almond spikes. Knights speared them triumphantly. Honestly, easiest tournament they'd ever win. Afterward, half the court needed a new belt notch and a confessor. Fast forward to winter. Picture Matilda, our indefatigable housewife hero, hunching over a cauldron bigger than her ambitions. She salt rubs pork belly like she's trying to erase its memories, hangs green beans to dry into bean jerky, and prays mice don't stage a midnight raid. Her neighbor Lucas the tanner jokes that if starvation doesn't get them, scurvy will. Matilda laughs because medieval humor is 70% coping mechanism, 30% existential shrug. Deep winter nights stretch on. Families spoon thin gruel while telling tales of mythical lands where bread grows on trees and swans roast themselves. Children's bellies grumble in chorus. Parents pretend the sound is festive music. Outside, wolves howl reminders that protein still exists, just fast, furry, and with teeth. Come spring, fasting ends. Peasants break Lent with eggs, tiny globes of redemption, and maybe a sliver of ham older than the local abbot. Tongues that forgot salt suddenly throw a flavor parade in the mouth. But by the third day, hunger realism returns. Meat supply dwindles, and oats reclaim dominance. Feast, famine, repeat. History's most relentless sitcom minus laugh track. Yet the medieval world sowed seeds we still harvest today. Crop rotation, water mills, cheese aging caves, all born from sheer necessity. The concept of terroir, matching place to flavor, grew in monastery vineyards watered by miracle and muscle. Even our word restaurant can trace lineage to places that sold restorative broths to weary travelers, the ethical ancestor of drive-through chicken soup. So where does that leave us, modern midnight snacker with a streaming playlist and a fridge humming like loyal troubadour? Hopefully with gratitude bordering on awe. We complain if our latte foam art lacks heart shape, while a 14th century serf would faint at sight of morning orange juice. Next time your delivery app arrives 20 minutes late, remember, somewhere in history a farmer waited 6 months for a cabbage only to watch it freeze on the stalk. We've wandered a long, pun-sprinkled road together tonight, from barrel-aged cod to sugar unicorns, from plague carts to pie surprise. You've heard about acorn bread that could sand wooden beams, ale so thin you could read manuscripts through it, spices worth kingdoms, and a king literally peach-slapped into the afterlife. If that doesn't make you hug your refrigerator tomorrow, I don't know what will. Now close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let the imagined clatter of medieval kitchens fade into the gentle hum of whatever device you forgot to silence. Feel the mattress support your bones better than any thatched pallet ever could. Breathe in air pleasantly free of barnyard ambiance. Somewhere far back in time, our ancestors slogged through mud, chasing meager suppers under a sky brilliant with unpolluted stars. They can't fathom electric light, let alone garlic parmesan fries at 3 a.m., but they're rooting for you anyway. You're the descendant who finally gets to eat well and sleep peacefully. Don't waste the gift. And if tomorrow's lunch disappoints, shrug like a seasoned peasant, sprinkle a little modern spice, literal or figurative, then laugh at the absurdity of a world where you can gripe about quinoa texture while streaming cat videos in HD. History has a sense of humor. It's only fair we laugh back. Let's nudge the time machine a few furlongs further down the rutted road, because the medieval menu still has plenty of questionable entrees to serve and we're nowhere near the bottom of the cauldron. Keep that candle flickering, and your mind in recline. The lullaby with laugh tracks continues uninterrupted, no bullet points daring to poke their bony heads above the broth. Picture dawn breaking over a frost-nipped village square. Roosters are allegedly crowing, though one sounds more like he's coughing up splinters, probably because last night someone tried to smoke him over peat and changed his worldview forever. A baker named Tybalt unlatches his shop door and winces at the chill. Flour's scarce, yeast is sulking in a wooden bowl, and the town reeve wants 6 loaves before matins. Tybalt eyes a sack of ground fava bean husks, cheap filler with the subtle flavor of damp parchment. He sighs, mutters a prayer for forgiveness, hoping Saint Honoré, patron of bakers, still accepts IOUs, and tips the dusty stuff into the mix. Bam, medieval multigrain. Customers will swear it's exotic. Their molars will stage a walkout. Out in the fields, sun-cracked peasants advance in a slow wave, scythes swishing through barley like the world's saddest synchronized swim team. They steal glances at a wandering friar who's preaching about the virtue of contentment between bites of donated cheese. Contentment sounds lovely, but the farmers wish it came with a side of bacon. One lanky lad dreams of licking butter, just butter mind you, nothing fancy off a hunk of bread so fluffy it leaves fingerprints. He'll wake tonight to realize his pillow is actually a folded cloak that smells of damp straw and ambition. Still, he'll savor the dream as if it were foie gras. Swing over to the riverfront. Fishwives gut eel with the speed of street magicians, chatting about rumors that the Lord's Kitchen has hired an Italian master cook who does scandalous things with garlic. Garlic. Half the wives have never smelled it. The other half think it's what witches rub on broomsticks before liftoff. But fashions spread faster than lice. Give it a month and everyone will be adding garlic to pottage until entire parishes smell like continental sophistication and romance dives off a cliff. Speaking of lice, let's drop in on Sir Reginald Plume of Peacock, late to a tournament because Squire spent the morning delousing his velvet doublet with vinegar. Sir Reg's breakfast was 2 poached eggs, a slug of warm ale, and a lecture from the castle physician about balancing humors. Too much phlegm apparently. The cure, bloodletting and maybe roasted figs. Sir Reggie hates figs. He'd rather tilt at enemy lances than at his own digestion. Down in the castle scullery, scullions scrub cauldrons blackened by yesterday's sugar experiments, tiny edible gargoyles the cook molded to amuse the countess. The gargoyles collapsed into a syrupy tragedy after 20 minutes on the high table, but nobles laughed anyway, because nothing says status like pretending molten sugar is hilarious instead of hazardous. One kitchen boy, Edric, burns his thumb on caramel and utters a choice oath. The head cook threatens to fling him in the moat. Edric pictures wading among crayfish in cold disappointment, so he swallows the pain and keeps stirring. Character building, they call it. Meanwhile, 2 friars sit under a chestnut tree outside town, cataloging sins confessed during the week. One is secretly tallying which penances translate into hens or turnips because the friary larder is running on spiritual fumes. Confession can be monetized. You see, 10 paternosters and a discreet donation of eggs goes a long way towards Sunday omelets. The other friar doodles sour-faced devils gnawing on adulterated bread. Even monks need editorial cartoons. Night falls, festival fires flicker. It's St. Martin's Eve. The one-time commoners are technically allowed to roast a goose without a noble's permission. Whole village smells like sizzling hope. Children whirl in circles, dizzy on nothing but smoke and anticipation. Old Margery, toothless yet fearsome, declares herself goose inspector and nabs every crisp skin shard that falls. She hasn't chewed solid food since the last crusade, but goose skin melts nicely if you press it against your gums and imagine better days. Across the channel, Parisian students cram into a tavern called Le Scribe's Elbow, arguing whether Aristotle would approve of watered wine. Someone recites a new poem comparing unrequited love to week-old eel jelly. Applause, not so much. But the innkeeper pours another round and pencils the line on his wall menu. Eel jelly of despair, 2 deniers. Marketing is born. Skip east to Prague, where an alchemist claims he can turn turnip tops into gold if you simmer them in vinegar with a hair from a virgin and the whisper of a raven. He hasn't succeeded, but townsfolk keep paying because hope, like swans, is beautiful and often roasted. Back in our original Hamlet, winter's second curtain drops. Snowbanks creep higher than hedges. Granaries echo ominously. Tybalt's husk-heavy loaves are now standard issue and folks gnaw them into shapes. Some accidentally invent cookies, others produce dental disasters. Archaeologists will puzzle over. The friar's chestnut tree is bare. Confessions are down. Omelets are cancelled. Yet villagers still gather for story nights, crowding around fire pits, fashioning tales thicker than stew. They speak of a legendary land east of the sunrise where cabbages grow the size of wagon wheels and bread soft enough to nap on. Everyone nods, eyes shimmering in torchlight. Such myths inoculate the spirit against starvation better than barley ever could. Spring eventually tiptoes in, dripping mud and possibility. Buds unfurl like secret letters. The first nettles get boiled into bright green tonic. Sure, it stings your tongue but also reminds you you're alive. Tybalt bakes a batch of bread with actual wheat. Edric graduates from pot scrubber to onion chopper, a promotion measured in tears. Lady Blanche, the countess who loves sugar gargoyles, decides garlic is fashionable after all. She orders a whole bulb minced into her peacock sauce. The castle steward faints at the cost. Lady Blanche waves him away with a lace handkerchief, smelling faintly of brave new breath. A spice ship rolls into Genoa, carrying pepper, cloves, and a rumor that somewhere in the Indies people season food with fiery red pods called chilies. Italians laugh. What flavor could top black pepper? Give it a century, they'll put chilies on everything that can't escape. For now, pepper remains the diamond dust of dining rooms. A banker in Florence mortgages a vineyard to buy a pound, hoping to flip it at Easter and retire. Spoiler, rats nibble the sack, he cries, vows never to underestimate rodents again, and writes the first unofficial pest control policy. On a windswept moor, our lanky lad from the barley field is now courting the Reeves' daughter. He carves her a wooden spoon inscribed, "May it stir better days." She chooses him over the Reeves' preferred suitor, a miller who actually owns reliable shoes because sometimes optimism tastes sweeter than stability. Their wedding feast includes pottage improved with wild herbs and, miracle of miracles, a single pork haunch gifted by the Lord as patronizing largesse. The newlyweds share 1 bite each, then parcel the rest into 17 meticulous leftovers. Romance, meet resource management. Years slide by in the manner of butter off hot griddle, assuming you have butter. Famine flares twice, plague once, and yet the hamlet persists. Children become wheelwrights, weavers, wandering minstrels with questionable pitch. One child, Alderic, stumbles upon an old sack of peppercorns buried beneath his grandfather's floorboards, hoarded treasure from days when nutmeg equaled oxen. He sneaks a nibble, nearly combusts, then charges entrance fees to neighborhood kids for the thrill of dragon tongue. Entrepreneurship sprouts in cracked soil. The church bell still dictates fast days, but villagers grow canny. They invent mock bacon, battered strips of parsnip smoked over juniper to smell convincingly meaty. Friars shrug, God presumably winks. Creativity wiggles through doctrine like eels through baskets. Let your eyelids droop while we drift aboard a spice galley bound for London. Storm clouds bruise the horizon, barrels clack in the hold like impatient stomachs. A sailor named Maeve squeezes a lime over her salted fish to ward off scurvy. Doctor's orders from a Moorish physician she met in Cadiz. She's ahead of her time, no one else on deck trusts green fruit. When the ship docks,
Maeve sells the remaining limes to a cook at Westminster, who's convinced tart sauces hide meat spoilage. Centuries later, British cuisine will still be perfecting that theory. Night again, stars prick the velvety sky untroubled by smog, they blaze like gossip. T-Bull the baker, older now, bites a heel of honest wheat bread sprinkled with actual salt mined from somewhere Slovakian. He closes his eyes, tasting progress. Tomorrow's loaves will still be heavy, but less deceitful. Tiny steps needed daily. And you, listener, afloat in quilted comfort, can keep snoozing through these centuries. We've roamed markets and swamps, banquet halls and sculleries, inhaling odors ranging from goose fat to garlic-laced aspiration. Yet we still haven't finished the pantry. The cheese cave awaits, ripening wheels like philosophical arguments. The honey cellar hums with bees plotting monarchy. The alehouse brews a batch daringly strong, might even survive a splash of river water. Rest while I stoke the story fire for the next watch. In a little while we'll wander into the forests where truffle-snuffling pigs rub snouts with destiny, and we'll eavesdrop on a university debate about whether lentils encourage lust. Spoiler, scholars can't agree. For now, loosen your imaginary belt, roll to the cool side of the mattress, and dream of bread that never chips teeth and feasts where laughter flavors every bite.
We trudge onward through the medieval kitchen labyrinth, swords swapped for ladles, in search of the next questionable culinary frontier. Let the tale simmer on. No headings to distract, only the steady drip of humor thickening this broth of absurdity. Imagine a half-forgotten cheese cellar, hewn beneath a manor's great hall, where aging wheels rest on stone shelves, so cool they'd give a penguin goosebumps. These cheeses hibernate for months, growing rinds crustier than a knight's boot, their insides oozing into aromas that could crack paint. "Oh, the dungeon," they whisper. A novice cellar hand named Rowan, sent to fetch a wheel for the Lord's repast, nearly faints as the stench assaults him. He staggers back, clutching a candle, petitions the kitchen for reinforcements, armored in cloth masks and oversized gloves like plague doctors on a cheese heist. Every bite risks culinary enlightenment or existential crisis, yet nobles swoon at its pungent grandeur, mistaking funk for finesse. Above ground, the honey cellar buzzes like a sunlit chorus. Barrels of golden nectar await reluctant pilferers, apothecaries who bottle it as medicine, bakers who use it for sweeter, stickier tarts, and peasants who smuggle jars home under cloaks, dreaming of spoonfuls that taste like captured sunshine. It also ferments into mead, the OG adult grape cookie juice. Mead flows at festivals, lubricating tongues until even the shy miller's daughter declares her love for the grumpiest blacksmith. 2 minutes later, she's petitioning the bakers for more honey sticks, carb-laced Cupid arrows. Speaking of festivals, picture a midsummer fair at dusk. Stalls bristle with roasted chestnuts, candied fruits skewered like glittering baubles, and giant pies filled with curried rabbit so exotic that townsfolk speak of Persia in hushed giggles. Jugglers toss flaming torches, bards croon odes to the noble pea, and children gamble onions like gold coins, trading for a bite of spiced pork from a passing noble's platter. Meanwhile, a pickpocket grips a too-tight belt stuffed with purses and stolen almonds, only to drop them when a sudden pigeon strike elicits shrieks that reverberate across the cobblestones. Even crime is more entertaining when food's involved. At the alehouse, the barkeep, a burly woman named Gudrun, taps kegs with the precision of a surgeon. Her ale is strong, 1 mug and you're recklessly friendly to strangers, 2 mugs and you're confessing childhood secrets to a stray dog, 3 mugs and you're convinced you can duel the village guard with a wooden spoon. Patrons debate theology, politics, and the merits of sea salt versus river mud seasoning, ignoring that their cheese and bread chaser likely harbors campers' toilet bacteria. Still, every cough is greeted with a glass clink and an enthusiastic "here's to death by fermented disaster." Villagers sometimes band together for communal bake days. All the local ovens, the communal hearth, the abbey's bakehouse, even the castle's ovens, when the Lord permits, roar to life. Dough rises in huge vats with extra lumps donated by novices who forget to knead properly. The resulting loaves vary wildly, some so fluffy they could cradle an infant, others so heavy they require 2 villagers and a pulley. But everyone leaves with bread and hearty laughter, and often someone invents a new recipe by accidentally stirring crushed nettles into the dough. The green bread becomes a fad, briefly until teeth start chattering from mild poisoning, reminding bakers to double-check their foraged herbs. In remote hamlets, herbalists ply their trade with broth concoctions promising immunity from plague, enhanced vigor, or a more persuasive courtship voice. Ingredients include eyebright flowers, squirrel whiskers for whimsy, and a dash of crushed bellflower root, said to sweeten the humors. Patrons sip these stews by hearthlight, grimace through the aftertaste, then claim they feel 10 years younger, though typically they just feel warm enough to nap by the fire. Away at Cambridge, scholars debate whether lentils encourage lust, whether cucumbers cool the head, or whether pigeons still count as fish on fast days. They scribble in Latin, argue through midnight candle wars, and occasionally toss uncooked peas at each other when one dares to suggest that vinegar may upset the balance of bile. Gutenberg is still tinkering with printing, but circulating pamphlets about salvation through proper spiced cabbage generate more buzz than any theological treatise. Pilgrims on the road to Santiago stash stale biscuits and salted beef in leather satchels, trading morsels with fellow travelers for a warmer cloak or preservation advice. They marvel at inns advertising beds for 2 denarii, meals for 1 denarius, not realizing the inn's 2-bit soup is just pottage reheated twice. Still, fellowship glows brighter than any lantern, and sharing is caring, even when care tastes like yesterday's stew mixed with last week's grit. Back in our imaginary castle, the royal kitchen crew experiments with new ingredients: turmeric imported at astronomical cost, seaweed from Brittany, even cocoa beans smuggled from Spanish galleons. The cook ponders making a proto-chocolate sauce, but nobles balk at the bitter poison, preferring sugar-laden confections instead. So cocoa retreats to exotic status until centuries later, when chocolate shops flourish and doctors prescribe dark chocolate for melancholy humors. Spring turns to summer, summer to autumn, and our tale accrues more scraps: a plague doctor who demands extra sprigs of rosemary to mask the smell of death, a traveling peddler who sells pilgrim badges shaped like tiny scallop shells, useful as pastry cutters in desperate times, a lord's feast interrupted by a chicken that escaped roasting and honks in the great hall, causing nobles to shriek like startled geese. Through it all, the same truth holds: medieval cooks, peasants, nobles, and pilgrims endured by sprinkling humor on hardship, by sharing scant bread around smoky fires, by savoring every honeyed crumb as if it might vanish with tomorrow's dawn. And we, reclining in comfort, can chuckle at their quirks, marvel at their ingenuity, and sleep knowing our own fridge outshines any dank cellar. At the backwoods tavern, the wobbling wheel, where stools lean more precariously than the clientele, a traveling minstrel named Fenton entertains the drunks with a ballad of the Great Gruel Rebellion. He strums his lute, singing of peasants who once tossed their pottage pots at tax collectors, declaring, "No more barley mash for tyrants." The punchline delivered with a wink. The only thing that rose higher than their spirits was their bread by accident, thanks to an overzealous baker who mismeasured his yeast and unwittingly invented a fluffier loaf. The tavern erupts in sloshing mugs and hoots, because revolution sounds better after 3 pints, especially when it ends in a celebratory feast of turnips and stale cheese. Meanwhile, at a sunlit cloister, nuns in habits knead dough for communion wafers. Sister Agnes, rumored to have once been a jester before answering her calling, pops a rogue raisin into her mouth and impersonates the abbess, declaring, "By this wafer, I pronounce thee hungry no more." The other sisters snort suppressed giggles and redirect their novices to press the dough into perfect circles. No yolks of humor at the Lord's table, thank you very much. A fortnight later, the local lord commissions a novelty banquet. Every dish must be colored green to celebrate the first verdant flush of spring. Cooks brainstorm madly: nettle soup dyed a vibrant emerald, leeks sculpted into tiny dragons, butter churned with parsley, and peas pounded into paste then smeared lovingly across roast fowl like edible jade. The guests marvel until teeth turn slimy, and some noble ladies find their lace cuffs ruined by verdigris sauce. Yet they declare it the height of sophistication, green being the color of renewal, envy, and incidentally liver failure from overspiced broth. In a different county, a peasant midwife named Elowen brews morning-after herbal teas, claiming they soothe post-festival hangovers. Ingredients include rose hips for vitamin C, oak moss for grit, and a secret pinch of lavender.
Villagers quaff it at dawn, swearing by its power to banish last night's regrets. It also eases coughs, unless the mildew in the thatched roof taints the water, in which case it doubles as expectorant and emetic, knocking out 2 ailments in one go. Down in London's bustling port, a shipping manifest details the arrival of a curious cargo, 50 barrels of pickled lampreys. These eel-like creatures, once a delicacy at the highest tables, zigzagged up rivers with slimy determination. Pickled in vinegar, they slither across platters, their rubbery flesh spritzing diners with brine. The aristocracy claims its refined, peasant cousins gag down a single bite as penance for being born north of Watford. Meanwhile, in the woodlands, foragers gather mushrooms under moonlight, following whispered lore about which caps cure restlessness and which induce nightmares of giant pies chasing you across the moor. A misidentified death cap nearly sends 2 brothers into a midnight race for the abbey. Tale goes that one brother woke weeks later, babbling poetry about a dancing cucumber. Moral: always leave mushrooms to the church-trained herbalists, or be prepared to rhyme involuntarily. On the grand stage of the royal court, chefs unveil a new invention, the sugar cage. Imagine a bird cage woven from spun sugar, in which live birds peck at candied fruits suspended from threads of honey glaze. At the grand unveiling, the birds panic by entrapment, create a spectacle of flapping feathers and frantic chirps. Nobles find it hilarious. Look at the poor creatures reveling in luxury, until a bird escapes mid-bite, flutters onto the lady-in-waiting's lap, and leaves a sticky pillow imprint. Only in court does one call pest invasion delightful improvisation. Back in the village, the schoolmaster Mr. Pritchard uses a sheaf of oats to demonstrate arithmetic, each grain a unit, each handful 100. At snack break he realizes the lesson turned delicious. Children pocket handfuls for home. The village matron scolds him for teaching math too well. He apologizes, then whips up a remedial lesson in bean counting, nutrition and numeracy in one go. On market day, vendors hawk virtual cuisine, scrolls describing sumptuous feasts with enough flourish to make mouths water. Imagine roast boar drizzled with myrtle-infused honey, its crackling skin shimmering like embers. Patrons buy scrolls, read them at home, then grumble over their thrice-boiled radish stew. It's the world's first food blog print edition, minus the photos, and no one minds because the language is spiced so richly. Imagination runs wild. Near the monastery's orchard, monks host a quince jam-making ritual. They peel and quarter the hard golden fruit, stewing it in honey until it yields a ruby paste. Pilgrims covet jars as holy relics upon departure. They carry quince jam on their backs like cherished icons, ensuring at least one palate pleasure through the next baptism of cold rain. In a different forest clearing, a hermit named Old Finn claims to have tamed a wild boar by feeding it chestnuts laced with elderflower syrup. Every dawn, he and the boar share cups of nettle tea. Travelers swear the boar recites scripture in grunts. Finn denies training it, attributing the performance to divine design, though some suspect the boar merely echoes to amuse passing pilgrims. And so, from cheese cellars that double as secret torture chambers of aroma to honey-fueled romances, from green spring feasts to sugar cages gone awry, the medieval world stomps on its own culinary banana peels daily and survives to form the backbone of our foodie legacy. The next chapter beckons. Truffle hunts guided by underpaid swine, salt caravans braving thieves and sandstorms, and the first inklings of chocolate that some bold alchemist dares to blend with miso. Spoiler, don't try it at home. A moonlit forest ridge where truffle hunting swine snuffle like metal detectors for buried gold. A grizzled hunter named Bertram swaps whispers with his boar, promising scraps of last season's rye if it locates a scent earthy as a philosopher's beard. The pig roots triumphantly, unearthing a fist-sized truffle that will fetch more groats than Bertram's annual rent. He hoists the fungus aloft like Excalibur, fancy scent of luxury that even nobles pretend tastes like the ground itself. Meanwhile, the boar, unconvinced it deserves the praise, trots off to grunt at a squirrel. Meanwhile, on the dusty salt road, caravans of ox-driven wagons grind along chalk-white dust that sticks to tunics like medieval talcum. Caravaneers guard their precious salt blocks as if each were a firebomb. They season everything from pottage to parchment. Librarians protest the new salt and ink fad. Bandits in battered helmets ambush wagons for a handful of salt, then ride off triumphant, forgetting they've also stolen half the cattle. The thieves trade salt for stolen turnip yields, forging an underground salt and turnip economy that historians will dub far more interesting than coins. In a scribbler's cramped study, a monk named Brother Giles experiments with cacao nibs dredged through sugarcane syrup, proto-chocolate that smells of bitter coffee and burnt sugar. He presents his chocolate to the abbot, who solemnly swirls it in a chalice and declares it sinfully delightful. Word spreads so swiftly that monks start smuggling cocoa beans into infirmary broths. Patients trade miraculous cures for dubious dark puddings. The church debates whether chocolate belongs in confessionals. Debate lost, chocolate wins. At the quayside, fishmongers bicker over whether a famed catch called a gurnard should be sold as delicacy or downgraded to medieval cat food. Customers squint at its bulbous head and flipping tail, buy it for a pittance, then learn through charcuterie experiments that gurnard fillets crisp up beautifully, an accidental triumph worthy of a modern gastropub had gastropubs existed, instead of rats dining at every corner. Finally, under a cartwheel moon at the traveling fair, two alchemists bicker beside bubbling cauldrons. One insists garlic-infused oil cures plague, the other champions sugar-slicked vinegar as the ultimate panacea. They sample each other's potions, both recoil in theatrics, and dub the results medieval molecular gastronomy. Spectators cheer, toss coins, and later retell the tale as the night the cure tasted like week-old onions. In sun-dappled valleys where vineyards cling to terraced slopes like green staircases to heaven, vintners coax must from stubborn grapes with wooden presses creaking under the strain of ambition. A jolly vintner named Ottilie watches her workers stomp in vats, purple juice sloshing around ankles like drunken ballet. She samples the first must of the season, tangy sweet with a whisper of wild yeast, and pronounces it fit for a festival. Nobles import these wines by the barrel to douse their roast boar, while peasants dream of a sip so potent it cures winter's gloom. Poor Ottilie quietly sells a few casks to local alewives who spike their ale with wine, creating a hybrid brew that makes patrons both sociable and snobby, a rare medieval combination. Meanwhile, road toll keepers on crumbling bridges demand payment in both coin and cheese. Travelers approach with wheels chirping across planks, only to discover their journey costs a wheel of pungent Roquefort. The toll-keeper, Master Brandrick, sports a beard-stained mold green, a badge of honor that says, "I guard cheese and I know things." Miscreants who try to pass with soft Edam are promptly ordered to eat it on the spot. By the time they gag down the pasty wedges, humility is well seasoned into their sinews. Out on the fjords, Norse fishermen haul in salted cod so stiff it doubles as a makeshift weapon. A burly Norseman named Sigrun sits on deck, gut hook in hand, cackling as she fillets each fish with surgical precision. She flings salted cod steaks into the hold alongside barrels of root mash, turnips mashed with fish guts to create Bergen surprise, which no surprised taste bud survives. Yet coastal families treasure this gritty concoction through long winters, banking on protein over palatability. Back on the continent, a traveling spice vendor erects a tent bedecked with carpets and brass lamps, hawking sachets of saffron, mace, and cardamom. He sprinkles demonstrations onto bread, declaring, "One pinch elevates any stew to imperial height." A skeptical peasant tries a crumb, sneezes twice, and decides imperial height tastes like burnt kerosene. Undeterred, the vendor weaves tales of a distant caliph who once fed saffron-infused porridge to his camels, resulting in camels that hummed hymns at dawn. The crowd applauds wholeheartedly, some from genuine awe, others to mask indigestion. In castle kitchens, apprentices practice making dumplings, soft pillows of dough designed to soak up every drop of meat broth. One ambitious lad forgets to tie his dumpling pouch, releasing doughy blobs that drift across the hearth like scalding blimps. The head cook shrieks, calling them Trojan dumplings, and orders them fished out with tongs. They're served anyway, cheered as a novelty. Guests bite into leaky dumplings and find broth pooled onto plates like edible hot springs. Positive reviews ensue. Themed feasts become the rage. Night of the Four Elements inspires dishes representing earth, mushroom ragout, air, foam flavored with rosewater, an omen of future culinary foam trends, fire, pepper-spiked chili pot, and water, clear fish consommé served in hollowed spheres. Nobles don elaborate masks so they look elemental too. Unfortunately, the rosewater foam collapses mid-service into a sticky puddle, and the chili pot proves so incendiary that several guests demand holy water to douse tongues. Nonetheless, the event is deemed avant-garde. In remote alpine hamlets, goat herders collect their herd's milk for cheesemaking. A cheesemaker named Helmut ages rounds in caves where dripping limestone infuses subtle minerality. tourists, mainly wandering pilgrims, risk frostbite for a taste. They return home telling tales of cheese so sharp it slices bread by intent, and so creamy it demands tears of joy. Helmut smiles behind a rind-gray apron, knowing he's the unsung hero of winter sustenance. At university guild dinners, scholars debate proper etiquette for using trenchers, flat slabs of stale bread used as plates. They punctuate arguments with bites, some chip off corners to test texture, others use trenchers as armrests before nibbling hunks that have absorbed gravy like thirsty sponges. Professors award extra credence to those who champion trenchers as communal tableware of the people, a radical notion destined to resurface during bakery revolutions centuries later. Meanwhile, a crafty apothecary distills vinegar from pickled grapes, branding it as dragon's breath elixir to cure scurvy and clear sinuses. Customers inhale deeply, sneezing sparks of laughter. Rural healers start adding herbs, rosemary, thyme, even juniper to mask vinegar's assault. The concoction becomes a staple for poultry brining, fish curing, and eyebrow plucking. Unofficial side effect: fierce glare. As spring warmth teases the clay ovens to life, villagers assemble for a communal cheesemaking festival. Curd is ladled into cloth bags suspended from rafters, whey drips into barrels for pig feed. The resulting cheese wheels embody months of silence between siblings enforced by fermenting tofu, cheese. Children pin dairy-stained ribbons on the cheesy champions, shouting titles like Queen of the Curd, with unabashed pride. Under a canopy of stars, a midnight hunt yields wild boar marinated in juniper berry syrup. The roasting spit turns slowly as hunters swap glints of triumph, their ragged tunics drifting smoke like battle banners. One boar leg greets the wind with a sizzling allegiance to flavor, and diners gather in reluctant fear that such decadence may anger nature. They press their plates skyward in a silent toast, to survival, to swine, and to tonight's blazing feast. Shepherds coax their flocks toward spring pastures, and one eccentric wool merchant, Gerhard Nachum-Sachs, decides boiled mutton broth is insufficiently celebratory. He imports a handful of dried beans from a distant friar's stash, tosses them in the pot and brags that he's inventing stew. The resulting brew is gritty, rich in protein, and half the village spends noon coughing through a violent fiber cleanse. Gerhardt cackles at his heavy breakfast, while everyone else swears off legumes for a season. Meanwhile, in a royal apiary hidden beneath the palace gardens, pages dressed as bees tend honeycomb frames, harvesting fresh honey for the queen's pantry. An enterprising page accidentally cracks a frame, and a river of golden syrup floods the stone floor like molten sunshine. Panicked pages slip, skittering across sticky patches. The queen's favorite poodle gorges itself senseless. The head beekeeper, Master Alaric, tries to salvage ceremony by brandishing a porcelain pot of honey as if it were Excalibur. Nobles gasp, then fight over who gets to smear honey on their morning scones. Not far off, a caravan of charcoal brazier vendors parades into the village square, offering portable grills for aristocrats who refuse to eat anywhere but al fresco. They roast chestnuts over open flame, selling them in waxed paper cones while reciting boasts about their braziers. 5 kinds of coal, portable as a purse. Patrons buy grills, roast chestnuts until blackened, then curse smoky clothes and return home, smoky smelling and chestnut poor. Still, they'd do it again next market day. Deep inside the cathedral's shadowed crypt, a gifted baker, Sister Euphemia, crafts Easter bats, crescent-shaped sweet rolls shaped like flying creatures. She dyes them with beet juice for uncanny color, then sprinkles poppy seeds that shimmer like starlight. On Easter dawn she releases a dozen rolls from cages, so townsfolk can chase them like giant sugary bats. Children shriek with delight, adults stagger after runaway pastries, and the bishop brutally declares it a joyful symbol of Christ's resurrection, though half the congregation thinks it a slightly madcap pagan throwback. Out in the woodland's edge, a druid-turned-herbalist named Kian concocts a moonwort mead, fermenting honey with moonwort herbs harvested under a full moon. One sip reportedly grants vivid dreams of the old ways, talking oak trees, dancing badgers, and an epic bacon-wrapped boar. Skeptics dismiss it as soporific swill, dreamers swear by its power. Kian's mead becomes a must-have for poets and bakers looking to imbue their loaves with prophetic yeast. In the bustling port of Marseille, a fish salter named Rosalia experiments with a new brining method. She layers fillets of mullet with sea salt and crushed rosemary in wooden barrels, then buries them in damp sand for 3 weeks. The result, a cured fish so succulent and herbaceous that passing merchants trade sacks of saffron for a taste. Rosalia, now wealthier than many nobles, quietly invests in a small vineyard, ensuring she can wash down her mullet with her own sweet wine. Meanwhile, the young apprentice cook in a Byzantine noble's household attempts to recreate distant Eastern delicacies using only local ingredients. He fashions meatballs of spiced lamb, threads them onto skewers, primitive souvlaki, and grills them over coals. The first attempt charcoals to ash, but undeterred he refines his technique until skewers sizzle just right. The noble guests marvel at exotic skewered lamb, little suspecting the recipe's origins lie in his grandmother's spice drawer, and a moment of culinary hubris. Back in the chocolate rumor mill, the abbot of a small abbey writes to his brother in Spain, begging for more cocoa beans. He's convinced that if he can perfect chocolate as a medicinal drink, he'll be hailed as a saint. He drafts prayers to St. Augustine, asking for steady hands in the conching process. But alas, the best he ends up with is a gritty slurry that clumps like unresolved theological questions. Yet the abbot persists, and centuries later, chocolatiers will thank his dusty journals for their early missteps. On isolated Orkney Isles, hardy crofters fish by torchlight, skewering sea urchins on driftwood stakes and grilling them until tender. They crack the spiky shells with hammers borrowed from shipwreck salvage, scoop out orange gonads, and dip them in melted butter, urchin caviar they call it. Visiting merchants gag at first bite, then grin as briny richness hits their tongues. Word spreads. Suddenly the Isles attract adventurous gourmets who pay in fur pelts for one spoonful of urchin. In the portfolio of culinary oddities, one must include the feather pudding, baked in a goose carcass, so the pudding soaks up the bird's essence. The cook layers pudding batter inside the hollowed goose, roasts it until golden, then carves it out like a soufflé. Noble guests marvel at the pudding of paradox, musing on bird and batter merging. The cook insists it's haute cuisine. Guests nod through polite mouthfuls, grateful the next course is simply cheese. Finally, let us glimpse the miracle of the communal herb garden, a riot of parsley, thyme, rosemary, and sage sprawling amid a monastery's courtyard. Carts of pilgrims depart with little cloth bundles, stuffing pockets with fragrant sprigs to flavor soups on the road. Some use herbs to mask the smell of unwashed tunics, others brew simple teas to calm wayfarers' gut. Even the poorest carry a pinch of culinary dignity as they trek from shrine to shrine. Let your eyelids grow heavier than a bag of spelt, your mind float like yeast in warm water. When dawn chisels light through your shutters, you'll wake grateful your morning toast doesn't double as carpentry. For now let dreams swirl with thoughts of roasted chestnut confetti, barrels of lamprey brine, and the sweet hum of honey barrels vibrating with possibility. And if the midnight stomach grumbles, reassure it. True medieval hunger was for 3 centuries straight, but your fridge door is just a fingertip away. Sleep on, brave traveler, and murmur whenever you're ready for the next stew of stories.